It's funny how stories shape our lives and narratives twist the mundane into the horrifying. I never thought I would become part of one of those narratives, but that's exactly what happened to my family during our time in Howland, Ohio. And I was 12 years old when I first heard of the Harpy. We moved to Howland in the autumn of 2012, lured by the stunning vistas and a generous offer on our dream home, a sprawling Victorian that had seen better days. It had charm, they said, a touch of the historic. I soon found out that charm sometimes comes with a cost. The first night in the new home was a chilly one. The wind howled through the trees and rattled our windows. My parents, oblivious to what lay ahead, unpacked boxes while I found solace in a dusty corner of the attic. It was my sanctuary, dimly lit with the fading light of the horizon. The beams creaked ominously above me, and I could almost hear whispers in the walls. One evening, as the sun melted into a deep crimson, I ventured into the vast expanse of the woods that surrounded our home. The trees formed a thick canopy overhead, and I remember feeling watched, the hairs on my arms prickling. As I walked deeper, I stumbled upon the remnants of old buildings, ghostly pillars smudged with moss. I felt drawn in, yet an innate fear held me back. Days turned into weeks. Strange things began to happen. My brother, Timmy, who was 8 at the time, would wake up screaming, claiming he saw something in the shadows of his room, a dark shape with wicked claws and wings. I brushed it off as nightmares, but when Timmy's screams filled the house multiple times a week, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle in my gut. Mom laughed it off too, trying to lighten the atmosphere, but Dad grew worried. He took to researching the history of Howland, late into the murky hours, often returning to bed with eyes as heavy as lead. "Just some local stories," he would mutter, though I could sense the strain in his voice. But the stories aren't just stories. One night, driven by curiosity, I tiptoed down the staircase, following the sounds of my father's intense murmurs. He was poring over an old library book, the pages yellowed and frayed. "The Harpy of Howland," it read. "A creature born of malice, known to torment those who dare venture too deep into the woods." A chill ran over me. Had I wandered too far? According to the legends, the Harpy was born of sorrow, an entity that preyed on fear and chaos, known to steal away children and leave behind terror. As I read the passages under the dim light of the kitchen, the shadows seemed to dance around the room ominously. One evening, after another sleepless night filled with relentless wails, I awoke to an unnatural silence. My heart raced as I noticed Timmy's bed was empty. Panic surged through me as I searched the house. My parents had already begun to lose composure. Mom was crying, her eyes wild, while Dad called every neighbor, asking if they had seen him. Hours stretched into an eternity, and just as hope began to fade, we found Timmy. He was standing at the edge of the woods, staring at something I couldn't see. When we called to him, he didn't budge. He didn't seem to blink. I felt the air grow cold as I approached him slowly. "Timmy!" I shouted, grasping his arm. He turned to me, his eyes glassy and hollow. "Mary, it wants me," he whispered, his voice as thin as a spider's thread. "What?" I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my chest. "What wants you?" Suddenly, a chilling wind gusted through the trees, and the shadows began to twist. A silhouette emerged from the thick brush, a form with grotesque wings, and a face like an owl, but yet human-like. It soared toward us, a wretched cry shrieking through the air. My father yelled, pulling Timmy away, while my mother fell to the ground, sobbing. That's when I felt it, a penetrating gaze, dark and hungry, fixated on me. I was frozen in place, trapped by an instinctual dread. The creature, the Harpy of Howland, was real. It flared its wings, casting a shadow over us, and then it vanished into the darkened trees. We fled the woods, bursting into the shelter of our home, locking every door and shuttering every window. The atmosphere was heavy with disbelief and fear, our safe haven transformed into a prison. Days blurred into nights, and whispers seemed to linger around us, suffocating in their certainty. It wasn't until a week later, with only the distant sound of rustling leaves breaking the silence, that Timmy vanished again. This time, it was early in the morning. When particles of dawn spilled into our windows, we realized he was gone. We searched, calling out his name, fear stealing our breaths. Then, miraculously, he returned just as suddenly, but he didn't come alone. The harpy was behind him, watching us with malicious delight. Timmy walked toward the creature and turned, his eyes wide but expressionless as if he were entranced. In a moment of sheer panic, my dad lunged for him, pulling Timmy back. That was when the harpy unleashed a terrible cry, an otherworldly shriek that pierced the very fabric of reality. It filled my ears with a sickening pressure, threatening to drown us in despair. We didn't understand until it was too late, but the harpy had claimed Timmy. The child we knew had faded, leaving only a shell, and now it was our turn to face the reality of its darkness. The harpy's curse twisted through our home, consuming everything it touched. Our once warm abode turned into a chilling mausoleum as despair seeped into every crack. Days melded into one another, each marked by an unshakable pall that hung over us. I often found myself staring into mirrors, searching for glimpses of my brother, just a flicker of that familiar smile, but met only reflections that spoke of loss. My parents, too, were shadows of their former selves, with gaunt faces and hollow eyes that barely acknowledged each other, as if they were ghosts wandering a life half-lived. I took to exploring the attic again, that dim sanctuary where I had first retreated from the horrors that had overtaken our lives. Dust-laden boxes held relics of a happier past, remnants of laughter and birthday candles that felt like echoes of another world. I couldn't shake the feeling that something other than sorrow dwelled in that attic. The next days passed in a haze of dread and confusion. Timmy stayed quiet, his gaze drawn constantly to the forest, as though a pull governed him, leaving an insatiable void where his spirit should have been. I noticed small changes, fragments of him that seemed to slip away when he stood too close to the windows, when the breeze carried the faintest remnants of despair. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us in visceral threads of fear, tales of lost children who had once played beneath the canopy only to vanish, absorbed by the harpy's grasp. Then, one crisp evening, heavy with the scent of rain, Timmy ventured into the woods again. Whether he was drawn by some terrible compulsion, or perhaps a dark invitation extended by the creature, I couldn't tell. I'd resolved to follow him this time, desperate to reclaim my brother, to pull him from whatever depths the harpy inhabited. Clutching a flashlight, I made my way through the underbrush, the familiar dread coiling tighter with each step. The forest was alive with utter malevolence. Shadows danced around me, and the night air shimmered with the weight of unseen eyes. Ahead, I spotted Timmy's silhouette against the twisted trees, frozen in place, just as he had been before. It was then that my heart lurched as I saw the shape emerge, the harpy, wings arched wide, its face a grotesque mask of longing and anguish. "Timmy," I screamed, terror overtaking my voice, but he didn't budge. My feet moved almost of their own accord, thrusting forward, tears blurring my vision. "Timmy, don't listen to it." As I reached out, my fingers grazed his shoulder, and in that instant, the world morphed into chaos. The harpy tore the air with a shriek, and a terrible wave of despair swept over me, colliding with all the invisible cords that bound our fate to this malevolent creature. Its gaze turned on me, sharp as a blade, heavy with hunger. I felt my essence peel back, layers of bravery stripped away as I fought an instinctual urge to flee. "Timmy," I cried again, grasping him, hoping he would break free from whatever spectral grip held him. Yet, the moment grew more surreal. I could sense the harpy's delight, a twisted joy radiating from it, a hunger not just for children, but for the sorrow that lay in their loved ones. But then, something shifted in Timmy's demeanor, something lit within his vacant expression, flicker of recognition. "Mary," he murmured as if awakening from a nightmare, but before he could say more, a shadow loomed over me as the harpy lunged forward. Instinct took over. I shoved Timmy behind me, fending off my fears as I faced the wretched creature. "Get back!" I screamed, my heart hammering. I had to protect my brother. I would claw and tear through the night if it meant bringing him home. As if recognizing my defiance, the harpy screeched, flailing its wings, creating winds that threatened to push me back. In that fleeting instant, I swept my gaze around the clearing, the trees with their gnarled branches grasping towards the sky like bony fingers. My hand instinctively dove into my pocket, closing around a jagged fragment of glass I'd secretly kept. The shard, a tiny talisman against the darkness, glinted with a faint, moonlit sparkle, its sharp edge a fragile bulwark against despair and darkness. With a surge of determination, I broke through the brute facade of fear. "You won't take him," I spat, holding the shard aloft as if it were a sword, my heart pulsating with rage and love. "Timmy, come to me." As I took a step forward, I felt the dread wash away as Timmy blinked rapidly, finally breaking from his stupor. "Mary," he shouted, a mix of confusion and fear lighting his face. All at once, I felt a reverberation, a churning of pain within the harpy. It shrieked again, the sound a desperate cry of agony, and staggered back. "Come on, Timmy," I urged, grasping his hand and pulling him away from the harpy's grasp. We sprinted through the forest, branches scratching at us like skeletal fingers, and I felt the chase surge behind us. It was not just anger driving it, it was rage bled into our shadows, a singularity of torment stretching back through the generations. Timmy and I stumbled into the clearing before our home, the distance feeling like miles between us and safety. Just as we reached the threshold, a strong wind rushed past, and I turned to see the harpy hovering in the air, its form twisting and writhing with fury. But we were safe, the light spilling from our home washing away the shadows, the warmth wrapping around us like a blanket. For now, the creature could not enter. The air was thick with the lingering horror of what had happened, an invisible thread connecting us to the dark entity that wrenched Timmy from us. We had escaped, but I felt the harpy's presence linger, a malignant whisper embedded in the very fabric of Howland. As time wore on, I watched my brother begin to heal, pieces of his laughter returned. But as summer turned to autumn, an unsettling truth settled around us. Though we'd escaped, the harpy had left its mark. And I knew it would always be watching, lurking just beyond our conscious minds, waiting for the opportune moment to pounce again. The stories had come to life, and ours had resumed, yet shadows still lay thick between the cracks of our memories. A grim reminder that we lived, as part of an unwritten tale, entwined forever with something ancient and malignant that had weaved itself into our fate, lurking just out of sight.